There's some strong rumors coming out of Ottawa that Justin Trudeau may be replaced if he does not win in October. To talk more about this and other big stories from the Hill is our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion. Ray, why don't you share with our viewers who Mr. Trudeau's successor may be?
Well, the Toronto Star reported earlier this week that many Liberals are thinking about Mark Carney, who is currently the governor of the Bank of England, but he's Canadian. He's actually the former governor of the Bank of Canada here in Ottawa, as a potential successor to Justin Trudeau should he lose the October election. Obviously, if Mr. Trudeau loses, he'll have no choice but to vacate his seat as Liberal leader. I don't think that they would want to bring him back to fight another election. So some Liberals have told the Toronto Star that, Mark Carney could be an interesting successor to Mr. Trudeau. Obviously, we asked the question this week to many Liberal MPs and cabinet ministers, and they all said, no. We have a leader right now. We're very, very happy with Justin Trudeau. We're not looking for anybody else. The other name that I've heard several times over the past few months as a potential successor to Justin Trudeau is Chrystia Freeland. She obviously earned a lot of credibility over the past few months with the renegotiation of the Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreement. And more recently with the Americans, she managed to convince the Americans to drop those tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. So, she's got a lot of credibility right now. She might be she might be a potential successor to Justin Trudeau. We'll have to wait and see. But first, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, what happens on October 21st.
I'm thinking with Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor, he's not going to say that the budget will balance itself, right? He's probably got a little better plan than that.
He knows a thing or two about budgets. Yeah, that's for sure.
U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was in Ottawa recently, and we're getting closer to ratifying that new NAFTA deal, otherwise known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement.
The USMCA, as the Americans call it. The new NAFTA 2.0, as a lot of people here in Ottawa like to call it. It was his first visit as vice president. Donald Trump has never traveled to our nation's capital to meet with Justin Trudeau, but his vice president did on Thursday. And as you know, the Trump administration really wants the new deal between Canada, the United States, and Mexico ratified as soon as possible. They'd like to get it done this summer, but they're having some issues in the U.S. Congress where Democrats have a majority now since the last midterm elections. But Mr. Pence tried to reassure Canadians, saying that he and Donald Trump are adamant they want the new USMCA to be ratified by the United States Congress this summer at the very latest. As you know, Justin Trudeau tabled a bill this week to get the Canadian Parliament to ratify the USMCA. But what was really amazing this week is how things have come a long way between the Trudeau government and the Trump administration. You'll recall the nasty tweets by Donald Trump last year when he called Justin Trudeau weak and dishonest. That was in the midst of the renegotiation process between the three countries. And this week, the tone was totally different from Mike Pence. He said that President Trump and I believe that the relationship between the United States and Canada has never been stronger. So things have come a long way. They talked about a whole bunch of things. China, they agreed on a whole bunch of things. The only point of disagreement was abortion. As you know, Justin Trudeau is a staunch pro-choice. Mr. Pence, the U.S. Vice President, is pro-life, and so is Donald Trump, obviously. Mr. Trudeau brought up what's going on in the States, where many U.S. states have decided to pass legislation making it harder for women to get an abortion, to terminate a pregnancy. He brought it up, but Mr. Pence said, you know what? We're going to have to agree to disagree here. He's a pro-life. He's pro-life, and he said that even the best of friends can disagree at times. So no hard feelings, it seems, where abortion is concerned.
I thought you were going to say the other thing they disagreed upon is whether it's going to be the Raptors or the Golden State Warriors who's going to win the NBA championship, right?
That's not a big issue, obviously.
Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg ignored a subpoena to appear before an international committee of parliamentarians in Ottawa. Ray, I didn't know you could do that. Just ignore it.
Well, you can if you're American, if you're not in Canada. I mean, a subpoena in order to appear before a parliamentary committee here in Canada is obviously only good if you're in Canada. but Mark Zuckerberg lives in the States, and apparently that's where he was this week. It's an international committee of parliamentarians from about a dozen countries that met for 3 days here in our nation's capital. They're looking at things like breaches of privacy, the spread of fake news by those giant web platforms such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And the fact that Mark Zuckerberg and his senior VP, who also got a subpoena to show up, didn't show up, that was seen as an insult by the committee. They're trying to find ways, basically, those parliamentarians that met in Ottawa for 3 days this week, they're trying to find ways to curb the spread of online hate, fake news online, obviously. And an example that was mentioned a few times during the hearings is that video of Nancy Pelosi, the U.S. Congresswoman, the video was altered a few weeks ago to make it look like she was drunk during a conference. Facebook took forever before removing it. As a matter of fact, some people say it's still up there on Facebook. They were asked, the Facebook representatives, they were asked how quickly they could take down a fake video on a Canadian politician in the upcoming Canadian election that we're going to have. And what they had to say didn't reassure anyone. As a matter of fact, one MP from Great Britain said she was, quote, sick to death of sitting through hours of platitudes from Facebook. So the web giant didn't make any friends here on Parliament Hill this week out.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been blasted for all of the cuts he's been making, but recently he had a bit of a change of heart and is backing down from some of those cuts. And that, Ray, should help federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer.
Yeah, this is a major about-face by the Ontario Premier, who, of course, as you know, is joined at the hips with the federal Tory leader. And actually, last March, when the Ford government tabled its first budget, there was a sigh of relief on the part of Conservatives here on Parliament Hill in the nation's capital. They were relieved that there weren't any major cuts in Ontario, which would have had the potential of scaring voters away. So the fact that Mr. Ford has backtracked on those cuts to municipalities is good news for the federal Tory leader. The Liberals here in Ottawa are already attacking almost every day the federal Tory leader based on what's being done in Ontario by the Ford government. So I don't have confirmation of this, but I'm pretty sure Mr. Scheer has asked other fellow Tories across the country to keep a low profile between now and the next federal election on October 21st.
And Mr. Scheer unveiled the broad strokes of his immigration policy this week. Ray, tell me more about that.
Yeah, it was his third of 5 major political speeches he's going to be giving between now and the end of the parliamentary session on June 21st. Mr. Scheer vowed as a prime minister he would end what we're seeing right now, a lot of asylum seekers crossing the Canada-US border into our country. He said that he would do that by canceling a loophole in the Canada-US agreement on the safe third country. In terms of how many immigrants a Scheer government would welcome to Canada, he didn't give any numbers this week, saying he would welcome as many immigrants as Canada needs based on our economic needs. So his policy here still needs to be fleshed out. He says he's going to give some hard numbers in the upcoming election campaign. The Conservatives, as you know, are also being accused by some people in Canada, including some Liberals, of being anti-immigrants. And Mr. Scheer responded to that this week by saying in his speech that there is no room for intolerance, racism, or extremism in Canada. So he's hoping to put that to rest.
Some Mexican drug lords have moved to Canada, apparently thanks to a Trudeau government decision. How's that possible, Ray?
Well, you'll recall that the former Harper government had made it mandatory for anyone coming from Mexico to get a visa to enter Canada. The Trudeau Liberals promised in the last election to do away with that requirement, which they did shortly after they formed government. And we've learned that because of that move by the Trudeau Liberals, some 400 people involved in drug trafficking, we're talking about many drug lords, have moved to Canada since 2015. About half now live in Quebec. And the Canadian government apparently doesn't know exactly where these people are. The Conservatives raised that report this week. They pressed the Public Safety Minister, Ralph Goodale, for answers, and all Ralph Goodale responded is that if anyone coming from Mexico shows up in Canada and can't be properly identified or poses a safety risk, well, that person will be detained. But the fact is, according to our reporting, 400 people linked to the drug trade in Mexico, including some dangerous drug lords, are now living in Canada, and police are looking for them. So this is pretty scary stuff.
Absolutely. Ray, the saga continues between Canada and China. China still has a ban on Canadian canola and pork, and our Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is having a bit of a tough time reaching her Chinese counterpart.
Yeah, she told a parliamentary committee here in Ottawa this week that she's trying to have a relationship with her Chinese counterpart, but the problem is she won't even pick up the phone. So there's no relationship right now to be had. And this goes back to what we were talking about just last week. A former Canadian ambassador to Beijing said that even if Justin Trudeau were to pick up the phone to try and get in touch with the Chinese prime minister or Chinese president, they probably wouldn't even answer. This is how angry China is right now at Canada for arresting Meng Wanzhou, the senior Huawei executive, at the request of the Americans. So, yeah, Ms. Freeland said she's doing what she can, but right now China is not answering her calls.
A Senate committee will be investigating the failed prosecution of Vice Admiral Mark Norman. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, and Mr. Norman, who has apparently a story to tell, might get that opportunity. As you know, the Trudeau Liberals recently, on the House side, they shut down a request to have an investigation before a House parliamentary committee. Now, the Senate, which is mostly made up of independents, has voted to open an investigation, but in the other House, so Mark Norman, the Vice Admiral, will be called to testify. So will Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan and the Chief of the Defense Staff, Mr. Vance, whose decision it was to suspend almost 2 years ago Vice Admiral Norman from his job as number 2 of the Canadian military. This is going to be very interesting, and it remains to be seen exactly how much Mr. Vice Admiral Norman will be able to say, because he's still in the military. He's not free to say anything he wants. But the beauty of a parliamentary committee is that anyone who testifies there enjoys parliamentary immunity, which means he can't be sued for what you say. But it's going to be very interesting, and it's all going to happen very soon, because that Senate committee is expected to file its report, its conclusions, by June 20th. So it's all going to happen over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
And it remains to be seen how much his testimony may actually impact and hurt the Trudeau Liberals, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be very interesting to follow.
And speaking of Monsieur Trudeau, our Prime Minister is going to be honoring Canadian veterans in Europe next week.
That's right. He's going to be traveling to the United Kingdom and France for the 75th anniversary of DDay and the Battle of Normandy. Those were pivotal moments, as you know, in the Second World War, and some of Canada's greatest military accomplishments. So, yeah, the Prime Minister is going to be there for the better part of next week. He's going to spend several days in Europe to attend a series of commemorative events, which will be followed around the world. The 75th anniversary, as I said, of D-Day and the Battle of Normandy.
Lest we forget. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
My pleasure, Hal.